Have you ever asked yourselves why the Nobel Prize is called that? It is named after Alfred Nobel, a Swedish chemist who lived in the 1800s. Actually, to tell you the truth, he envisioned the prize on his own, through his will, in which he left his estate to create an annual award for those who had contributed to the welfare of mankind in various fields. The Nobel Prize, indeed. This is the end of the story, but what we are interested in is what happened before, because Alfred Nobel was not just a chemist, but the inventor of dynamite, a revolutionary patent that earned him millions, but also made him the target of widespread criticism. One of these accusations particularly affected him. One day, by mistake, a French newspaper published his obituary. The article portrayed him as a greedy and heartless person, more interested in accumulating wealth for himself than in doing anything good for society. Nobel was so disturbed by this that he decided to act on it, and the establishment of awards seemed to him the perfect way to leave a good memory of himself. The story of Alfred Nobel is certainly an extreme example, but it takes us right to the heart of this episode. If we can face it, change is always a possibility. This is true for ourselves, and it is also true for our work. For those challenges that seem impossible, but seen from another perspective, can turn out to be an opportunity. This is Getting to Know Us, a 4-part journey that looks past the surface and explores the values that guide us every day in our professional lives. Getting to Know Us is a podcast series by Cora Media, sponsored by Tessia Group. Whether it's doing more physical activity or fine-tuning our organizational skills, we know that change can be difficult. But before we get into strategies to improve the way we do things in certain situations and open ourselves up to something new, let's make one thing clear right away. If we feel we are struggling when we face change, it's not only our fault. We are also designed to make as little effort as possible. Our brain's main task is to build predictive models about our environment. That is, to hypothesize what is happening around us and enable us to achieve the goals we set for ourselves. Our ancestors, for example, made predictions about the environment for hunting prey, harvesting fruits, and so on. The more certain the brain is about what is happening, the more effective its predictive model is, the less energy it will have to consume. Nicola De Pisapia, an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and Cognitive Science at the University of Trento, points out that habits and routines establish neural pathways that serve to respond to situations we already recognize, which is why they cost the brain less energy. When, on the other hand, we face something new, our brain is in a condition of uncertainty, and it can no longer apply the same predictive models because the context has changed. It will then have to work on a new model that allows it not only to inhibit the routines it had previously developed, but to create a new sequence of actions. A laborious activity and also costly in terms of energy consumption. This explains why our brains show a certain resistance to change. We have understood that we are creatures of habit. Our brains love safety, and when we try to get them to go a different way, to change the predictive model, they can be reluctant to cooperate, at least at first. I don't know if you've ever been to England, whether on vacation or business, and rented a car. For those who are used to driving on the right side of the road, changing sides is not an easy thing to do. On one hand, we are aware that we have to do it because those are the rules, but at least at first, we will have to endure the unpleasant feeling of being on the wrong side of the road. At every intersection, at every traffic circle, we will have to make an effort and convince our brain to do something new, which it really doesn't feel like doing. But as the days go by, we will be able to introduce the new routine, and driving on the left side will come more naturally to us. If you want to put your brain to the test, try looking online for the Stroop test. It is a kind of a spreadsheet, a chart, with a series of words written in different colors. The test, which takes only a few minutes, consists of trying not to read the words, but to pronounce instead the names of the colors with which they are written. For example, if the word is cat and it is written in green, we will have to say green. If the word is yellow, but it is written in blue, we will have to say blue. This sounds like a very trivial task, but you will soon find that your brain will do everything it can to get to trip you. How can we get around this obstacle? In the animal world, there are those who have done it. For example, the ascidian, a marine animal with a very special feature. In the first phase of its life, the ascidian moves through the oceans thanks to its nervous system, which allows it to move and make predictions about the environment in order to procure food. In the second stage, however, the ascidian stops moving, sticks to the rocks, and eats its own nervous system. It does this because it no longer has any use for it. It no longer needs to build predictive models about the environment. And from then on, it lives as if it were a plant or an alga. Of course, we are humans and not ascidians, but we can train our cognitive flexibility to better manage uncertainty. We live and work in contexts in which it is very difficult to make medium and long-term predictions, which is why, as Nicola De Pisapia points out, it is important to keep our ability to open ourselves to change active, to use our brains and minds to build models that can always be updated. Training our cognitive flexibility means changing our style of behavior, trusting routines a little less, and trying, now and then, to do new things. Activities that are simple, but allow the brain to tap into its capacity for ongoing learning, such as studying a new language or playing a musical instrument we have never played before. If we think about it, these examples are not that difficult to put into practice. But how can we translate this cognitive flexibility into our professional lives as well? Actually, we already do, although we often don't realize it. Take technology. We have already had to switch to a different email system, perhaps in the cloud, or we may have had to learn how to use a new device. We've probably also had to work with a different team than usual, or welcome a new resource to our team, or, more simply, to move to a different work site. When we talk about changes at work, we are not necessarily talking about huge revolutions, sudden upheavals that happen overnight. We are talking about small routines that we already deal with, and working on our spirit of adaptation allows us to do so in a more peaceful and less stressful way. This does not mean that automatic routines are always something negative. On the contrary, certain habits are not only quite useful, but are also assets, skills. If we are in a stable environment, one that does not change, routine is an excellent strategy. For example, having a work method that allows us to always perform certain tasks in the same way makes us more efficient and productive, leaving us time to focus on more complex or interesting tasks. It is when we work in a dynamic and changing environment that routines can block the drive for innovation and limit our ability to adapt, because they tend to make us say, well, that's the way it's always been done. Here then, The secret seems to be balancing these two forces, the drive for change and the preservation of the status quo, being able to explore new avenues and at the same time rely on our accumulated experience. This balance must also be struck in interactions with other people, because at times it is precisely this aspect that makes it even harder to be open to change. This is a very delicate topic because it involves not only our interpersonal skills, but also our sensitivity. Let's imagine that we have been with the company for a long time and have finally arrived in a role with some responsibilities. Over the years, we've seen pretty much everything. Technologies that seemed eternal and then became obsolete a few months later. Colleagues on whom we wouldn't have bet a nickel, but who instead turned out to be great professionals. In short, we've gone through a lot of changes. And now, we'd rather take things calmly. So when a newcomer, full of enthusiasm and eagerness, starts coming up with new strategies, solutions that are a bit more cutting edge, we automatically build a wall. The idea of change just doesn't appeal to us. And we find ourselves uttering those fateful words. That's how we've always done it. Simplifying, we might be tempted to label this situation as a classic generational clash. But the issue is more complex than that. It always comes down to our cognitive flexibility, which changes with time. Nicola De Pisapia points out that young people are, naturally, more oriented to exploring new things because they have had fewer experiences and their routines are less ingrained. In contrast, those who are a bit older have acquired a set of habits, automatic behaviors, that stem from skills they have accumulated over the years and which they, therefore, tend to rely on. Here again, the best strategy is a balance between the two paths, that of routines and that of innovation, but always based on mutual respect and a willingness to find the most intelligent response to solve the problem. Although until now we have been talking about more or less conscious difficulties, change has even more insidious enemies that go under the radar. These are biases, mental shortcuts that our brains and minds use to make faster decisions. It's a bit like taking for granted the steps that make up a process and skipping them to get to the result faster. Those of you who work closely with technologies will have heard of bias in relation to artificial intelligence because machine learning systems rely on a dataset that we ourselves provide, and therefore may reflect our preconceptions about a given topic. There are many cognitive biases that affect our professional sphere, and in some cases, they can become real enemies of change. One of the most entrenched ones is the bandwagon bias. The bandwagon effect urges us to follow the herd, to make choices based on what the majority does, and putting our critical thinking aside to some extent. Instead of thinking for ourselves, we passively trust other people's opinions because, if everyone says so, there must be a reason. While this strategy is most useful for saving time and energy on simple or minor tasks, let's try to imagine what would happen if, for example, in a team of technicians repairing a piece of machinery, no one noticed that there was a part that needed to be replaced. But the bandwagon bias is not the only one. Among the more insidious ones, Nicola De Pisapia recalls two in particular: anchoring bias and confirmation bias. The anchoring bias occurs when people are in a situation of uncertainty and don't quite know what decision to make. So, they tend to rely too much on the first piece of information received, using it as a real anchor to cling to. Let's imagine a negotiation in which one of the two parties is unfamiliar with the subject matter, such as the market value of a property. The first price that the other party communicates will be taken by the inexperienced party as an anchor, a reference point on which to base the decision to buy or not to buy the building. Confirmation bias is also very common in business and consists of interpreting facts, data, or information in a way that validates our expectations, the opinions we already have. This is an attitude that moves us away from the truth of things, and it is no accident that science follows the opposite process. Scientific tests and experiments are designed to look for errors, flaws in predictive models, and not to confirm the hypotheses formulated by researchers. In this episode, we talked about limitations, fears, and mental shortcuts, all factors that make the challenge of change a bit more complex, but also stimulating if we make room for that intuition that makes us say, why not? It's curiosity, and it perhaps is one of the most valuable resources we have, a positive impulse that encourages us to embrace innovation, to trust in change and in our possibilities. Being curious is a bit like opening a window. It's an exercise we need to do often to keep our cognitive flexibility alive and look at what is happening outside of ourselves. Getting to Know Us is a podcast series by Cora Media, sponsored by Tessia Group. Written by Alessandra Menozzi. Translated and narrated by Rosita Martini. Recording engineer, Luca Possi. Post-production and sound design by Cristiano Lomele. Production by Monia Donati. Text editing by Graziano Nani.